Hey guys, it's Missy, and welcome back to Books and a Baby. So today I'm going to be discussing the 6 books that I read for the Booktube Prize Octofinals. I was in Group H. So I'm going to go through all of the different books that I read, rating them lowest to highest, so you'll know how I ranked them, and I'll give you like a little review of each one. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first one is the lowest rated one for me, and that was Normal People by Sally Rooney. Now, this is a story about a boy and a girl. We have Connell and Marianne. They go to high school together. Connell's mom works in Marianne's house as like a housekeeper, and everybody that I've seen on Booktube seems to really, really love this book. And for me, I hated it. I felt like the characters just really annoyed me, like very badly, because they just wouldn't communicate. And Connell felt like he was supposed to be this bad guy, not really bad guy, but like popular dude who liked the unconventional girl. And then we had Marianne, who is really smart, but is almost a little annoying because of how smart she is. And then it follows their life as they go through college and years after high school. I didn't like the characters. The world building was fine. It was set in Dublin and Carrikelly, I think is how you pronounce it. But I have no experience of those places, so I don't know if the world building was done very well. I did feel like I could kind of picture where we were, but I am from America, so I don't know what those places are supposed to be like. The references to the culture I thought were done well, but also it just felt like all of the things about culture nowadays, because this was set in like 2010 to 2015, it just felt like it was supposed to be set in 2010 to 2015, but at the same time it felt like they were never on their phones. And I know, like for me, I graduated in 2008. I always had my phone. I was always on it, and I was even one of those people who read a lot and who didn't go out with a bunch of people or anything, but I was always on my phone. So I don't understand where they why they never had their phones. So I guess that's one of the things that really bothered me, that made it, not very relatable. I felt like the plot of the book was that there was none. The whole time you're kind of rooting for these two to get together, and they do, and then they don't, and all of it was just a big miscommunication. If they would have just talked to each other, it would have made so much more sense, and they would have been able to understand each other better. They weren't that different from each other, so that's why I think this book just really bugged me. I'm looking at my notes, sorry. Yeah, the writing was also really weird for me. So there's no punctuation or formatting differences between the dialogue and regular text. And so it just felt very weird. I didn't like the writing style at all. And so my reading experience was not well. If I wouldn't have been reading this one for the Booktube Prize, I would have DNF'd it. I had read part of it before and DNF'd it one other time, And so, like, I don't recommend this. I know a lot of people love it, and if you're one of those people, that's great. But this one just did not work for me. So, moving on, the next one, the next lowest for me, The Old Drift by, let's see if I can get that to focus. There we go. Namwali Serpel, I think is how you say it. So this is a story set in Nigeria. No, Zambia. Sorry. And this is set in Zambia following 3 different generations of people. So we follow the grandmothers of one of the generations. We follow their mothers and then the children. And I thought that the grandmother storyline of Sibylla, Agnes, and Mata were the most compelling for me. I really liked those characters. But the other characters just didn't really do it for me. So I'm going to read off part of my review. I just said the grandmothers, Sibylla, Agnes, and Mata, to be the most interesting of the characters. And I did find that the experience of the different families to be interesting, as I'm not able to really relate to any of these characters on an ethnic level. I do feel like I learned a lot about the cultural experience of people in Zambia. I think what I didn't like about the characters was the way that cheating seemed to just be accepted and expected. And I really didn't like the way that some of the characters were written and the reasons behind some of their motivations, because I felt like they weren't realistic. So that's how I feel about these characters. I did think the world building was well done. I have never been to Africa, so I don't know if it was good representation of the country of Zambia, but I found that since the author is Zambian, I think that they probably did a good job at representing the country that they're from. And I feel like I learned a lot about that part of the country that I wasn't aware of before. The plot didn't make sense to me. We had the grandmothers, the mothers, and then their children, and each of these sections almost felt like a different genre to me. I felt like the story that started in the grandmother section didn't really flow through the other 2 sections, and I just wish that the story would have flowed together better. The writing style was good, but I also felt like each section could have been its own book, and the characters have not been related, and I feel like I would have enjoyed it more if they would have been 3 separate books, 3 separate genres about characters who weren't related at all. There were some connections between the different characters, but I just didn't feel like they were that well done, in my opinion. I feel like the grandmother section was historical fiction, and I enjoyed that part of the story. I loved learning about the history of Zambia and the different colonizations and things. I thought that was really interesting. The mothers section felt like it was a contemporary about the lives of 3 women and their cheating partners, which in its own right would have been fine. I didn't like the cheating in this book because it felt like there wasn't really any consequences for the cheating. And for me, cheating is a really big deal, and I don't like when authors use it as just like a plot device. So I didn't really enjoy the mother sections because of all of the cheating. It just felt I just didn't like it. And then the children's section felt like a sci-fi story to me. I think that each section was well written on its own, but I feel like the genre hopping was what really pulled me out of the story. So my enjoyment continued to drop as I was reading this story. And I kept waiting for the stories to tie together in a more satisfying way, and it never did. I'll give credit that the author did a lot of research into creating this story. And so I do think that this story had a lot to say about Zambia and people's experiences, which I did enjoy, but I didn't like the mixture of the genres. So ultimately, this one got 2 stars from me, and normal people got 1 star from me. The next one, Torres by Carlina de Robertis, I think. So this is a story about 5 different women, and their journey through life during the late 70s and 80s as lesbians. I found the characters to be interesting. I just didn't feel like I could connect with any of the characters and their motivations for why they were doing what they were doing. I believe that what the characters went through was horrible, and I've never experienced the struggle that these women did just to love who they love. I do think that the characters were their own person, but I feel like they weren't as fleshed out as I would have liked them to be. The world building, I felt, could have been done a little better. This is set in a historical setting, and I felt like the tone of the world was done well, but I didn't really feel like I was able to get a good grasp of what the world was like in that part of the country. I feel like there wasn't really a plot to this story, other than just watching these women live their lives. I wish that there was more of a point to why they were doing what they were doing, because I didn't feel like I got that through this story. I feel like the story was well written. I just don't feel like there was a whole lot of research into the world. I feel like this author just kind of took from personal experience or personal experiences of friends, because I honestly don't know this is an own voices story. But I do feel like the experiences that these women went through were very relatable. I feel like this was a good book that taught me things that I didn't know about the world at this time, but I don't really feel like I was able to connect with this book in some ways because I've never experienced what these characters had to go through, which doesn't discredit what people have gone through in the LGBTQIA plus community. It just makes me realize that there are still a lot of things that I have to learn about these kinds of stories. So, Torres ended up getting a 2-star from me. But I did think that there was a lot of things that were good about it. I just didn't feel like the plot was very well done. So, and I read The Night Tiger by Yangji Chu. And this one got 3 stars from me. So I was very interested in this book by the line in the synopsis: a sweeping historical novel about a dance hall girl and an orphan boy whose fates entangle over an old Chinese superstition about men who turn into tigers. When I read that part of the synopsis, I thought that this was going to be much more focused on the men who turn into tigers than this novel was about. So I found the characters interesting, but I also didn't feel like they were characters that I fell in love with, and at any point throughout the novel. I found Ren to be the most interesting of the characters, and even with him, I wasn't in love with him as a character as I was hoping to be. I found the setting to be atmospheric, but and I really did enjoy getting to explore this setting. I also thought that the dream scenes where Jilin and Rin see Yi were interesting. I think that this book will work for those readers who love atmospheric reads. The plot, while interesting, also felt a little all over the place. I think that Jilin and Rin's storylines were interesting, but the whole story basically being about returning a dead man's finger before the window of time ends just wasn't my favorite plot. I think that the other parts of the story were more interesting, but I also don't feel like with the title of the book being The Night Tiger, we really got to learn about the night tiger itself. The writing, I believe, is very accessible and easy to understand on a base level. It's all about Chinese folklore and the meanings behind things that kind of didn't make sense to me. I kept trying to figure out how them being the 5 virtues really meant anything, and I'm sure if I were more knowledgeable in Chinese folklore and traditions that maybe that would have been clear to me. So I do understand that I probably need to look into that more, but I didn't really understand other than the fact that they were all named for the 5 Chinese virtues, and that's what connected them. I'd say my enjoyment of this was just the middle of the road. I definitely didn't hate anything about this book, but I didn't love this book either. And I'd be interested in reading more from this author. So 3-star, I thought it was very middle of the road, but I did enjoy it. Then we move on to the second book, which is the second book in a series. So I actually read both books in this series because I thought you had to, but apparently you really didn't. So the next one is Olive Again by Elizabeth Strout, and this one is about this older lady named Olive and her life. It's just basically about her life. And I found Olive as a character to be very funny, and I just really connected with her. I just loved seeing her and her husband and their like bickering and things. I just found it really funny and relatable. So I loved the characters. They just really connected with me. And then we have, the world is just kind of modern day times. And it was just funny to see how Olive reacted to some things because I could very much see my mom in Olive in some of these ways, which I think might be one of the reasons why I connect with her so much, is I do see my mom a lot in Olive, even though my mom is one of the sweetest people ever, and Olive can be a little cantankerous and just speak her mind. My mom isn't like that, but some of the, Olive was a teacher, my mom was a teacher, just some of the ways that she handled things, I can see my mom doing as well. So, and then the writing I felt was top notch. I think that Elizabeth Strout did an amazing job writing these characters and giving us a plot that was interesting, even though it was just basically this woman's life. So the first book, we follow Olive and her husband, who is a pharmacist, and then in the second book, Olive's husband has passed away, and we're just following her kind of starting over again. And I found it really, really interesting. I think about the fact that one day, my husband could pass away and I could have to start over again. And just the way that Olive reacted to things just really made sense to me, and I felt very, very connected to her. I thought that the writing was amazing. I thought that the plot, even though there wasn't a whole lot, I felt like it was done very well, and it made me want to pick it up. So that's one of those things for me as a reader. If I don't want to pick the book up, then I'm not really going to like it. And I did find that Olive's story was compelling enough that I really did want to pick it up and keep reading. So my enjoyment was very high with this one. I laughed, I cried, I just felt very, very connected with Olive, and this one got 4 stars from me. And then we have my number 1, which was City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert. And this story reminded me of why I love historical fiction so much. I love being transported back in time to periods of history that I know nothing or maybe just a little about. So City of Girls is one of these novels that really sucks you in from the beginning and makes you want to know what's happening. So let's see. So the plot was the only thing that I kind of had a problem with. And that's because the story is supposed to be a letter written to Angela from Vivian about who Angela's father was to Vivian. And the problem that I had was that this was more than just a story about Vivian and her life and how she got to be where she is, which I loved. But when the story is supposed to be how Angela's father and Vivian came to know each other, it didn't make sense why Vivian told Angela all of this stuff that had nothing to do with her father. But that was like my only complaint. Otherwise, this would have been a 5-star book, but because of that, that's why it's a 4-star. So Vivian as a character, I loved. I felt like she was similar in ways to Evelyn Hugo, who I really loved, and I really cared about what was happening to Vivian, even though I thought some of it wasn't really that important to the story. I also really love Peg and Olive, and I thought that the Lily Theater was such an interesting place, and all of the people that Vivian got to come into contact with being there with her aunt. The world building in this was so well done. I felt like I was in the backstage area during the performances. I felt like I was in New York when Vivian was out on the town. I connected to the world and time so much throughout this story, and I believe that is one reason why I love this book so much. I found the writing style to be so well done, but I don't feel like this was an epistolary novel, like it was supposed to be, because the writing was just more of an actual narrative, not so much a letter. I think that the story would have been better if this was just Vivian having Angela write a biography about her, or it was just having it be Angela verbally receiving the story rather than the letter format, because I feel like no one would have written a letter or read a letter that was as long as this book was. So having said that, I loved my time reading this story. And when I suspend my disbelief about this being a letter to Angela, I just found the process of learning about Vivian to be fun, and I thought that it was interesting to see a woman who never found a man but was open about just enjoying having an active sex life. And I feel like Vivian is someone that people can relate to, and I found it interesting that she never tried to make an excuse or say that she was a bad person for why she chose to live her life. And I think this story is for those who love fashion, history, and show business. So I'll definitely be picking up whatever else this author writes. So I really loved this one. It's why it was my number. So that's how I ranked the books that I read for the Octofinals. And if you've read any of these, please let me know what you thought of them down below. I post videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!